Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, joined by Aaron for a very special video. In fact, the first video in a brand new series of ours, the Mount Rushmore of. This is something I have been working on incredibly hard for 48 hours behind the scenes. Thanking Aaron, first of all, for jumping on the first episode. Listen, jokes aside, it's a series that I am surprised I haven't seen go around on YouTube before. I've even done research on this to check there's not dedicated podcasts or current film channels or anything like that, and it's not. And for anyone who doesn't have a clue why we're talking about Mount Rushmore, why there's a photo of four people in stone, obviously on a mountain called Rushmore. I think there's some American politicians screaming at me for saying that. I don't know American politics. I'm English, but it's a conversation that comes up a lot. It's a conversation that I've had in pubs with friends a lot, talking random subjects here, there, everywhere. And I've always thought, you know what would be great? Not a counterproductive ranking, but be a great, delicate little series to bring people on, get a topic, have a discussion around that topic, learn a bit more about what films might mean to people or what they enjoy. And for the first episode, we thought, well, Deadpool and Wolverine comes out this week. There's a lot of hype of the X-Men. We've got San Diego Comic-Con happening next weekend too. There's going to probably be some announcements there as well. It's a pretty big week for the X-Men. There's been X-Men 97 earlier this year, and we just thought, why not do the Mount Rushmore of X-Men films? I'm going to kind of add with this. We are going to have a traditional top 10 ranking video coming in the next few weeks for the X-Men, but we are waiting for Deadpool and Wolverine to come out, and then we're going to give people a couple of days to watch it, have a think, and then we'll start doing a top 10 ranking. And I will say this, and as we get into the Mount Rushmore stuff, the four that may appear on me and Aaron's list today might not be the top four that would be our top 10. I don't know. It's a very different type of video, and with this being the first video, we do want to hear from people at home what they think about the show. Any feedback's going to be appreciated. It's a new video in a new series. We don't have a locked-in schedule yet. There's discussions with Tate about what we want to do. Do we do 10 weekly episodes across a couple of months and do that a couple of times a year? Or do we do it every 2 weeks, etc., etc.? So this is the first one. It's a glorified pilot, and I haven't actually introduced him yet. So, Aaron, thank you for patiently being quiet and laughing. But how are you doing today?
I'm okay. I'm looking forward to talking about X-Men, because I was saying before we started recording that I've even on my channel or just in general, I never get really the chance to talk about X-Men, and it's one of my favorite comic book franchises, besides the MCU. So I'm just looking forward to talk about X-Men finally.
Excellent. I mean, I'll say this as well. I don't think, bar maybe for the old school viewers, Battle of the Brackets, where it's been brought up a few times, I feel like we did an anniversary video in COVID, and it became a retrospective, not a series, obviously. It just became a long few hours talking about X-Men films. And it's a series that I'd have loved to have done this year. There was an idea not to put together a team of remarkable people, but I was thinking of something called the 12 Days of X-Men, but there's unfortunately 14 X-Men films. Thank you, Dark Phoenix and the Mutants. So you've ruined my my Wolverine countdown. But yeah, we're going to give this a go. We're going to see how it goes. And as I mentioned, we do want to hear from people. We always take feedback into account, especially on a new video. There might be some teething issues. There might be some Photoshop changes as the series evolves. There's something that we think could be a lot of fun, unless we're just delusional. And if you want to find out about other videos else we're working on, you can go get us on our social media accounts. It's where we announce videos, Letterboxd, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all under linktree.com/cinemasavvy. We've got a Redbubble store for merch in the description. But jumping back to this type of video, I guess I need to kind of explain the concept. So for those unfamiliar with Mount Rushmore, this is the most I'm ever going to get into American politics, I bloody hope. Although we did just do a review on The Boys to plug that. There's a mountain with four faces etched into it. And they are the sculptures of 4 United States presidents: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln. I'm going to add as well that the mountain, I'm pretty sure, is on stolen land. I just always want to clarify that so people don't kick off,
I wouldn't be
because
surprised.
I don't want to sound like we're profiting a series off that. But again, the Mount Rushmore logic is more the conversations that come from it. And according to Wikipedia, they represent the nation's birth, growth, development, and preservation. I'm sure come the end of this year, someone might try and get a fifth face etched on. I wouldn't be surprised, but they'll try. But kind of putting that aside, the way it's used in pop culture and the way people talk about it with us and discussions is normally, what would be your Mount Rushmore? I see it for wrestling a lot. Who are your Mount Rushmore of wrestlers, or who objectively are the Mount Rushmore of wrestlers? And kind of my approach to the show and how we're going to try today's episode is, I have my 4. Aaron has his 4. There is no guidelines for the 4. It could be his 4 favorites. It could be the 4 films he thinks is best. It could be the 4 most important films to him that are X-Men films. It opens and engages the conversation into talking about things in a little bit more detail. And as you said, Aaron, it might not be able to have the detail we have had before. And then at the end of the video, we're going to come together to do, we think, a subjective top 4 of what we believe the Mount Rushmore of X-Men films should be. Keyword should there, because that'll be 2 of us agreeing. Maybe some of it's agreeing to disagreeing. Maybe we've got the same 4. I know we don't, because people are going to be raging on my picks. But yeah, does that make a bit of sense? Do you feel a bit, you sent me one polite message saying you need me to send a ranking video in, and now you're doing this?
Yeah. No, I think I get the gist of it. I mean, yeah, I've heard the term, like, what what's your Mount Rushmore of this, or what's your Mount Rushmore of that. I can't even say the bloody thing properly. But yeah, it sounds straightforward. We'll see if it is straightforward once we get into it, but it sounds pretty straightforward.
Excellent. And what we're going to do, we're going to take in turns each. So rather than I just do 4, you do 4, and we discuss and go through, we'll go one at a time. And then we'll talk about why we've made the choice we did, maybe see what the other person thinks. I'm willing to risk all on my first one. And then the combined one we'll do right at the end. But without further ado, because again, we don't know how long this video is going to be. I think maximum an hour. It's a bit shorter compared to some of our more in-depth stuff. There's only 2 of us. The X-Men films, you've only got a pool of 14 to pick from. Let's say we were doing best comic book film, Christ almighty, you'll be going back hours, and you could bring on so many people. So I hope this is a series people enjoy. And as I said, the feedback's instrumental in doing more of these and helping pave the way to make it more enjoyable. But yeah, talking X-Men, my first one, I'm laughing. I was late to watching the X-Men films. I didn't see the first 2. I obviously had memories with Spider-Man. I didn't see the X-Men animated series. I still haven't, 97 included. I didn't really know what X-Men was. I didn't know who Hugh Jackman was. At that age, I watched Star Wars. I'd watched Spider-Man. They were my things. And I've seen the Joel Schumacher Batman films, which I absolutely loved growing up. That'd be great with the Mount Rushmore of Batman films. And so it was one of my friend's birthdays at primary school, and we were taken to cinema to watch this new film. And this is why I'm going with this one first, because I know people are going to hate this, whatever, fine. The list is the list of 4 we choose. Looking at what Mount Rushmore is, it's about your ideologies, and to theirs it's American politics and what they've done for that country. Yeah. Mine's about the 4 that I'm choosing to discuss today. Now, this doesn't mean these 4 are the best or worst or whatever, but these are the 4 that probably maybe mean the most to me or have an impact. The 4 I want to take the time to talk about that goes into my Mount Rushmore. And I even have a Blu-ray case, because not only did I see this one at the cinema, this came free with the PlayStation 3 when it came out in 2006 here in the UK. 2007 in the UK, actually. Yeah. Because we got it later. I'm going with X-Men 3, The Last Stand. Now, I would never normally put a disc on the screen for the sake of it, but this is the first Blu-ray disc I have. I didn't have a HD TV for like 2 years. It sat on a shelf that I couldn't watch anything on. But I had seen this at the cinemas in 2005. I had no idea who Professor X was. I had no idea who Magneto was, who Wolverine was. I was just sat there like, what the hell's going on? Who's this guy that supposedly? Who's this lady who died, but she's clearly not dead? And I'll be really honest. I enjoyed X-Men 3. Have I watched X-Men 3 recently? No. It's in that list of films that I'm like sort of scared to go back to see if they've aged well or not. It's obviously not my favorite X-Men film, but I have to credit it as the X-Men film that introduced me to these characters that I've gone on to love, like Wolverine, Professor X, Magneto, and so many. And you know what? I actually think I enjoy X-Men 3 more than the first X-Men film. Maybe it's because I was new to seeing it. Maybe because I have more memories attached to it. I didn't see the first X-Men film until years after I saw the third one. Probably not even before Wolverine came out in 2009. I think I picked up on Blu-ray when I was probably 15, 16 and watched it then. Maybe before, not Apocalypse, maybe before Days of Future Past, because I remember that was humongous when it came out. But I'm choosing X-Men 3 just on my personal attachment to it, for it putting me on that scope of this is the X-Men, these are the characters we'll learn more about. And you know what? I think it's unfairly criticised. But I completely understand people's perspectives on this third film who did wait after seeing the first two, who had that cliffhanger of the second film, who had read the comics and knew about Dark Phoenix. I sympathise with those. That with this being my introduction to the X-Men, I'm a little bit more biased. So that's my first pick onto my Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, funnily enough, I did a video not that long ago with Charlie where we talked about like films that get undeservedly hated, and she picked X-Men: The Last Stand, and I totally agree, because I think whereas there are some X-Men films that came later down the line where I said this to George before we started recording, I have an appreciation for almost all the X-Men films, even the really bad ones. I still have a fondness for, and I still like them and can watch them without, going, oh God, I don't fancy watching that. And I think that's because X-Men was with Spider-Man, like the first ever comic I ever read. And then that kind of, when I've read that, I think it was Ultimate X-Men and Ultimate Spider-Man. Those were the first comics I ever read as a kid. And then those just kind of springboarded and started a whole thing of me being a nerd. But I've always had a fondness for X-Men, and they've been my favourite group in comics and film, especially in comic book films. And I do think X-Men 3 gets way too much hate, more than it deserves, because it's not perfect, but it is still enjoyable.
I've been in this boat with X-Men 3, right? And this is my theory. I'm not here to talk about social media, but certainly the big films of backlash in my lifetime, a lot of them tend to be like anticipated films. You were the third entry in this, you're the first film in like decades of this franchise, whatever. I think when you go back to 2005 or 6? 2006 this came out.
2006, yeah.
I think when you look at it, right, what comic book films were there? There was Spider-Man 1 and 2, 3 X-Men films. Okay, you've had decades of Superman and Batman. You've had the Blade films. You're hearing murmurs of these other projects. You've had, Daredevil. But this was maybe the first, not like super anticipated one, but this was a big one in an era where there wasn't a comic book film every year. Every other month. There was maybe one every year or two. And I feel like X-Men 3 is given this nasty opinion when, I'll be very honest, I've seen a lot worse come from it. Now, I do also agree that it isn't, maybe as good as the others. I know they lost Bryan Singer. Retrospectively, that's a benefit, although you replaced him with someone far worse, morally too. The Inner Circle, that is well known, the underage pool parties, they're well documented. And it's one of them where I just think, had this have come out in the mid-10s, it would have just blown by. I didn't really care for it. I like bits of it. I don't move on. But I think because they couldn't move on because that was it, then they were going to do prequels and spin-offs because they'd done the X-Men films. I think the year in which it came out makes it further unfair. So that's the last thing I say on X-Men 3. But I'm curious to know how many people have turned off the video after saying that, and what your first one's going to be too.
So I do. There is another one similar to yours that I will save for a little bit later, where I've got like a fondness for it, and I think it gets overhated. But there is a reason I picked it. But the first one I'm going to go with is the first original X-Men from 2000. And quite this might sound like an obvious pick, but I'm picking it because it is the first, and because I feel like it almost kind of paved the way. I know Spider-Man was a couple years later, but I think it really paved the way for the 2000s era of comic book films, and even comic book films we kind of get now. But there definitely was a trend in the 2000s, and you could list off loads of films here like Ghost Rider, Daredevil, Elektra, all those films that tried to be a little bit dark, a little bit gritty, but because it was the 2000s, there was still a bit of like weird campiness there. And even though X-Men, or even that initial trilogy, doesn't even veer into that category at all, of the campiness, well, in certain aspects, some of the films do. It sort of set that trend off anyway, and I do think it is very influential, and I don't think it gets the credit it deserves in terms of it kind of, if that film hadn't have come out when it did, along with Spider-Man just 2 years later, we probably wouldn't have comic book films the way we are today. And I know we previously had stuff like Tim Burton's Batman and the Superman films, but there really was like a couple of comic book films from like the late 90s and early 2000s that started to like springboard that. We started to see more comic book films because of that. And again, I'm going to stress this with my not my top four, with my Mount Rushmore. I've tried to pick ones that have significance to me, but also significance to the franchise as a whole. I mean, the original X-Men's not my favorite, but it's, again, I appreciate it because of that significance. Say what you will about the director, but it's influential because it is.
Yeah, and you're right. We aren't that. I can't call it a genre at this point in time, can we? We don't get the MCU without X-Men and Spider-Man that came before it, and it's ironic that these guys are now heading into the MCU with your No Way Homes and your, well, not the X-Men literally, but your Hugh Jackman as well. And obviously, long term, the mutant saga is the 3-word catchphrase being spoken by. I think did Kevin Feige work on X-Men? I think he did. I think he was in that behind the scenes.
I think
he was like I think it was an executive producer or like an assistant to someone, but he knew the comics.
I think
and his early days was him working on it all.
Yeah,
I know he was on the Spider-Man films.
I'm trying to remember because I think it's explained in that the MCU book that came out, I think, last year. I think this was the first Marvel film he worked on, and didn't really work on anything else before it, like Blade. I think this was the first. Can't remember what position, but I know that I think this was the first one.
I guess it comes full circle for him too. But if I talk about the second one, I'm not switching the order, but this is the one I jumped to second, and this is maybe my favorite of them. But the reason I'm gonna pick my second choice is it's X-Men First Class for starters. This came out in 2011. I remember this. I was at school. I was in the phase I'm really getting to film. And something, sorry to bore long-time viewers of this channel, I was really big on history, and we were at the modules at GCSE. So our history GCSE was spread across 2 years, like GCSEs are, but it was actually 2 years studying the 20th century. So you started with like the suffragettes, and you ended with the Cold War. So you literally, halfway through, toward the end, you're like in that post World War II stuff, and it was really well done. Credit my school for doing history that way. It was really engaging. This film came out at the same time we were doing the Cold War, and specifically the Cuban Missile Crisis. So as well as having the enjoyment as someone that was into film, and the enjoyment of someone who loved comic books, I used to read so many comics when I'm in year 10, 11, heading to sixth form. I was probably in the nerdiest phase I've been in. Getting a new X-Men prequel film, oh my God, it's young Magneto, young Professor X. Now, I don't mind X-Men Origins Wolverine. I have not seen that in a long time too. And maybe that's the one I'm most afraid to go back to watch more than X-Men 3. But if I remember, First Class wasn't that big when it came out. There wasn't a lot of buzz around it. It got good reviews. I didn't see it at the cinema. I didn't have a job. I was 14, almost 15. I couldn't watch every film at the cinema, and I'm pretty sure I had the choice out of Fast Five or X-Men First Class, and I picked Fast Five. I still don't regret that choice.
Mm.
But X-Men First Class, I absolutely adore. And as the years have gone by, this is every time I watch it, I feel like it gets better. As a character study, it's done some of the best work the X-Men films have done. Now, full credit to Matthew Vaughn. I think he is solely responsible, not just as the co-writer and director of this film. He wrote the treatment for Days of Future Past. Obviously, he left working on that to do Kingsman. I kind of respect that, and I'm gutted for that at the same time. I would have loved to have seen Matthew Vaughn's Days of Future Past, honestly, especially after First Class. But really, this film is important to the X-Men saga in the sense that if First Class doesn't work, not only do we not get Days of Future Past and what comes after, to get a new, I know it didn't end up being a trilogy, but what was discussed as a new trilogy, prequels to the X-Men, it's going to be different squads, different teams, a young Charles, a young Magneto, bringing on board James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender, who some of the brightest British talents emerging at that time, both stars of Band of Brothers, and putting them in an engaging story with a historical setting, something the trilogy did amazing, the X-Men films, with the real life human, we detest the logic of mutants, freaks, get them out, stuff like that. To put that into play, that this is how mankind's finding out about the mutants, I thought was exceptional. And I think it makes for a really impassioned story. And when you get to the ending, it is that firm. We have Magneto, we have Professor X, we have a new team, we have villains. My favorite scene in the entirety of the X-Men series, whatever you want to call it, is the Magneto Argentinian bar scene. That's how I learned what a Wunderbar meant. But yeah, I adore this film. I think this film is great. And I actually think maybe not underrated, but it isn't discussed as much as some of the bigger ones around it, which I think is massively unfair. And whilst I was watching this yesterday, last thing I'll say, if you look at the cast, the First Class, they've all become massive stars in their own. Like, yes, there's Jennifer Lawrence, Nicholas Hoult. You've got Zoe Kravitz, who's obviously got massive as well. I've forgotten the guy's name who played Banshee in this. He's been in massive Oscar films as well. The cast is exceptional.
Yeah.
And it's a film I tolerate Kevin Bacon in. And for anyone that's wondering what's with the Kevin Bacon hate, if you have lived in England and had to put up with adverts for the last 20 years,
I had a feeling that's where you were going with
Kevin
that.
Bacon. Yeah, it is, and I think he's great in this. I absolutely think he's great, and he's really worked in this. So that's me gleaning off First Class, but that's going on my Mount Rushmore. It has to, for so many reasons.
Yeah, I actually rewatched First Class for the first time in years a couple months ago, and it's one of those ones where I'd watched it years ago, loved it, but my memory of why I liked it kind of faded, and then rewatching it I was like, yeah, this, because there are some films you can you remember liking, you rewatch them and go, no, this isn't as good as I remember. That one still holds up incredibly well. And when you were rattling off the different modules from GCSE history, I was getting positive flashbacks to GCSE history as well, because I was massively into that. And I remember doing suffragettes and Cuban Missile Crisis and Vietnam for some reason. Yeah.
Wow. I honestly, it's a different podcast, history at school. I mean, my sister's module was dreadful. They did boring stuff like the invention and progression of medicine. I was like, medicine? I was like, I got to do World War II. But yeah, shouldn't really make it that exciting. But sorry, that's my First Class thoughts. What about yourself? What's second on your mountain?
So my second one is what I deem as the controversial pick, but I have a reason for it. And that is X-Men Origins Wolverine, for a couple of different reasons. First of all, similar to you with Last Stand, this was the first X-Men film that I saw in the cinema. I'd already been a fan of the previous three. I never saw them in the cinema. I think I only caught up with them afterwards on DVD. But I love the comics. I love the trilogy. And I think this was an after-school treat, because I think my mum and dad just surprised me. We're going to see... My dad was massively into Spider-Man and X-Men as well. We're just surprise, we're going to see X-Men Origins. And at the time, I thought it was the best one. It's not quite that when you rewatch it now. I still do like elements of it. It's obviously not the best X-Men film. But again, there are elements I really appreciate. And going on a similar vein to what I said about the original X-Men, if this film didn't exist, then we probably wouldn't have Logan. We probably wouldn't have Deadpool being as self-referential as it was.
Ryan
And I
Reynolds.
yeah, and I think that's half the reason why I've picked it. I've picked it because it has significance to me, because it's the first one I ever saw in the cinema. Um, Plus, I think it's also I think it's just as significant as the original X Men because of what we ended up getting down the line because this film ended up existing. Plus, I think there are some like genuinely really good ideas in this film. This is on a like side tangent, but I think there's some really solid ideas that whether they're executed well is another matter. But I would like to see them kind of go like revisit those similar ideas later down the line in some form, like the whole idea of just taking other mutants' powers and just mashing them into one other mutant to make this weird concoction of like abomination of a thing that's just got different powers. In the film, the executions, but it's a concept that I'd like to see someone do like actually do at service. But yeah, that's why I've picked X-Men Origins.
No, and I think that's fair to stand by guns. I mean, I'm the same boat as you. I remember that coming out; it was massive. I loved it, and you went
Mm,
online a couple of days later. It was like, oh, it was really good. People hated it. I loved the Black Eyed Peas. I was massive. I saw them live. I was like, oh my
mm,
god, Will I Am's in this. 10 years later, oh my god, Will I Am's in that. And it's one of
mm,
them where said it's given us Ryan Reynolds,
yeah,
Liv Schreiber's Sabretooth. Listen, I know we're not
yeah,
speculating. This video is going to be out before Deadpool Wolverine.
yeah,
When they announced it was Tyler Mane coming back, I was a bit gutted, but I'm like, okay, well, if Liv Schreiber's going to be in it, I hope it's a
yeah,
hidden cameo.
yeah.
I don't particularly care for cameos these days, but I would like that because I think him and Hugh Jackman are great in this, honestly great in the film.
Mm,
And the opening credits is one of my favorite opening credit sequences.
yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. Also, I'm gonna say it. This is the character is dumb, but I don't care. Agent Zero, like when I was a kid, was like the coolest mutant. Like it is when you watch it now, it does seem a little bit stupid. Him just flying around all over the place and essentially being like this film's equivalent of Bullseye and Hawkeye mixed together. But like when I was a kid, he was the coolest thing ever. And even now, I still have a weird appreciation for just that character, even though he doesn't really add anything to the film. He's just cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of them like that, and again, some of them just got an unjust
Hmm.
reaction as the years gone by, and I get it. It's not for everyone. Also, the ultimate slow mo shot of Wolverine walking away from the exploding helicopter lighting the cigar. That was like
Yeah.
everywhere. That was everywhere for years. The definition of a trailer shot. But kind of, if I head into my
Hmm.
third one, this is where it's going to get weird. So I'm going to jump a bit more forward, and the reason why is
Hmm.
my fourth choice was a bit harder than my third choice. I'd be shocked if this isn't on your list. Third choice, I've gone with Logan.
Okay.
Now, yes, I wish. My biggest concern for Deadpool and Wolverine was I think Logan's the perfect ending for Hugh Jackman, right?
Yep.
As character. And this is really where I was coming in. I'm not massively fond on Deadpool, ironic,
Hmm.
given what we're pushing. And I loved the first film the first time I saw it, then hated it the second.
Yeah.
I didn't care for Deadpool 2 on release, but I used to read a lot of Deadpool comics and I quite enjoyed them. And I thought it was so strange that I never gravitated it to film. I liked the Ryan Reynolds scenes in the Wolverine film. I said, I guess, before they sew his mouth shut. And you have, in my perspective with this, I have to put one of the two R-rated films on three. Sorry, with Deadpool,
Yeah.
and you have to look at what Deadpool's done for not only
Hmm.
this R-rated films at the box office, so
Yeah.
many other things going in with it. What Ryan Reynolds has done for the character, what's done for his career. But the reason I've gone with Logan is two reasons, and one might be a cheat. One, Deadpool, the leaked test footage.
Hmm.
If there was a mountain for leaked footage, the Deadpool leaked test footage can go on because that
Yeah.
is really what cemented it.
Yeah.
So there's not a cop out not picking Deadpool, but I look at Logan as not like levels of the Dark Knight. I look at Logan as like a character piece. I don't look at it as a comic book film. I don't look at it really is an X-Men film, and
Yeah.
maybe that's hypocritical for the video we're doing, but
Mm.
to give Hugh Jackman the send-off for playing this character for what, 17 years, 16 years at
Yeah.
this point in time, dedicated like a third of his life to it, one of the most iconic characters in modern cinema. Yes, people moan he had too many individual films, he had too many cameos, but he deserved to go out like this, to bring on board an incredible director as well. Someone whose background isn't comic book films. Yes, okay, he did the second Wolverine film, which
Mm.
almost made my list because I absolutely love that.
Mm.
Logan just perfectly cemented the legacy of this series of films for me. It's that bookend. It is the,
Mm.
hey, it's not an X-Men film outright, but if you
Yeah.
watch this, it's going to explore the characters, and not like the lore or mythology, but we're going to take these characters in their vulnerable sides and seeing how they can come out from either. You introduce Daphne Keane, who is incredible in this, who's appeared in The Acolyte recently as well. And it's kicked at her career. She was in the Golden Compass series as well. She's going to have
Yeah.
a massive career. And this to be her first film was remarkable. I think it is. Again, I don't particularly care for Oscars talk, but it's one of the few films where I think they really should have made that push for best film nomination. Nothing past nomination, but I have a massive soft spot in this heart. And I remember I watched it. They didn't do midnight showings when it came out. They released it at 10:23 p.m. because it was X23, and it took me like a few days to work out why they did that. And that was one of those incredible showings where I think the audience was just sort of sat there in silence come the end. And looking back at that point in time, what I thought was the end of the X-Men stuff. There'd been the murmurs at that point with Fox being took over. I thought that was the best way for the series to end. Obviously, it wasn't to be, with a couple of more films that did come out, but for me, it makes my Mount Rushmore as the sole character piece.
Yeah, no, I completely understand why you've gone for that. To be honest, I adore Logan because, like you said, it doesn't feel like a comic book film. It just feels like a really bloody good film. And funnily enough, my third pick is Deadpool for the reasons you pretty much listed. In terms of like what it did for R-rated films, and it's significant in the franchise, and I also feel like it kind of works. Even though tonally it's like the polar opposite of Logan, it does feel like it works quite well hand in hand with Logan, because if Deadpool hadn't come out, then Logan probably wouldn't exist. Again, similar to what I said about, I feel like I'm repeating myself with each one, but again, it's similar to X-Men Origins. If that hadn't existed, then we wouldn't have had some of the later ones, but I feel like if Deadpool hadn't done what it did, in terms of what it did for R-rated comic book films or just R-rated films in general, then we probably wouldn't have had Logan. And there was a very small point where I absolutely, again, similar to you, I read the Deadpool comics, funnily enough, the Deadpool and Wolverine comics, a lot as a kid. I was actually subscribed for a little bit, and I just read them every month when they came in. And I adored the first film when it was in cinemas. Like, I adored the hell out of it. And rewatching it again, like, I still like it, but I feel like the hype around it's kind of weared off, and now I'm just seeing it as a good film. The second Deadpool film, I'm not like, I do like the second one, but it kind of deteriorates with each watch for me, because I saw it twice in its opening week. The first time I thought it was hilarious. The second time, which was literally like a day or two later, half the jokes didn't land. And I was like, how has that happened between like a day? So I don't know what happened there, but yeah, I'm going with the original Deadpool pretty much for the reasons you just listed when explaining Logan.
No, I like that. We've got three different ones. This is going great. Okay, the fourth and final one for me. This is really tricky because I was split with two, and I've got a feeling yours will either be the same or the other of that two.
Yeah.
Okay, I won't say what the other one is. I'm just going to say what I'm picking.
Okay.
And I'm picking Days of Future Past.
Okay.
Now, the reason I'm going to go with this... Oh, God. I mean, okay, let's go for my personal attachment. I'd read the Days of Future Past comic book storyline. And I remember this thing of, oh my God, they're going to unite the two X-Men cast together to make one film. Yeah. I was like, impossible. Like, They'll never do it. How are you going to do that? And to their credit, they did it. Now, it's not really a criticism of the film. I guess we can all look back in hindsight at many film things. I wish we'd have had a second film with the first casts before doing Days of Future Past, but going back to that history setting, this is where the history setting became a thing. It's, hey guys, we did the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now we're off to Vietnam for like 2 scenes. And Jennifer Lawrence has become a star, an Oscar winner in between these 2 films. The cast are absolutely flying. Let's bring in Peter Dinklage from Game of Thrones, this great new series that he's been in. Everything came together for Days of Future Past. And I can't, for me, look at this Mount Rushmore type series and think, to have the merging of the original cast, for every character to get a moment, to even bring in new characters in Days of Future Past for the present day setting, to bring some of them back just to horribly murder them. Some of them, like Rogue, not getting screen time to the point they had to then add a special cut of the film years later to get her in it. And then you go into your first class cast. And you might think at this point, oh, is it an endgame cameos? No, every character in this has an arc. And to have a depressed Professor X with long hair not being bald, that he struggled with, you know, losing the ability to walk, that he's took it out on his mutant power, is that. Magneto has killed JFK and all these other things. There was so much to juggle, and I feel that it did it in a way. And it actually feels on like an endgame level scale for the X-Men.
Yeah.
But even jumping at the end, you're bringing in Hugh Jackman as Wolverine again. Logically, okay, yes, in the comics, it's not a Wolverine that goes back in time. It's Elliot Page that does it. They switch it around. But Wolverine, Hugh Jackman's the star. He's been the star of the series. Of course, it makes sense for him to time travel back. We've seen him in films time travel. We've seen him in First Class in one of the best cameos and F-word drop bombs in cinema. And I think this film did the impossible. It ended up being good. I remember going to midnight. I had my A2 Media A-level exam that morning, but I was at the cinema till like 3 a.m. watching this. I thought it was incredible. I picked up the collector's edition. You can't see it. I've still got like a mini Magneto helmet on my display that came with it if you've got the American import. But I'm a really big fan of this. I remember the hype to this. It felt like a grand finale of sorts. And I think the film delivered all my expectation and hope. And it's kind of what I look for with the X-Men stuff. It's the balance of the old cast, the new cast. And I'll be truthfully honest. Again, what I said about Logan, you could have ended the series with that.
Yeah.
Nope, we got Apocalypse.
Yeah. So, to no one's surprise, my 4th film is also Days of Future Past.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty much for every reason you've just listed. But I also feel like, I mean, some people could say this about X-Men too, but I feel like Days of Future Past is like, if you're going to watch one film to sum up why the X-Men franchise is great in a nutshell, I feel like Days of Future Past sums everything up you need to. You've got like the team dynamic, you've got the individual character arcs, you've got just the general nature of the story, then being able to go back. Just there are just so many things at play, and I do agree with what you said. It does feel like, I think structurally and tonally, it feels very similar to Infinity War and Endgame, where it's juggling so much at once, yet never feels like it's got too much going on. It always feels cohesive. It always feels like there's a sense of urgency to the proceedings. And this is up there for me with Logan and First Class as like one of the best. Like, pushing Mount Rushmore aside for a minute, it is one of my favourite X-Men films. Because if you look at like how the X-Men franchise is kind of split, I think Logan's my favourite standalone film focusing on like a singular character. This is probably my best ensemble one, because it is probably the best example you're going to get of an ensemble. X-Men 2 works great for the ensemble of that crew. First Class is great for the ensemble of that era. This is the best combination of both of them coming together, and you just kind of, in a nutshell, get one of the best X-Men films ever made.
And even before that, I'm thinking back to the Wolverine credit scene when it was like Professor X and Magneto's working together, and you're like, what must be so terrible that these two have come together after all these years? And you get the lovely little tease at the airport with the Industries, and as you kind of said, yeah, it's the perfect amalgamation of what it is to be
Mm.
an X-Men film, and the X-Men era itself, when a series has spent half its time in the past, half in the present, kind of makes sense to do that time travel film well. And yeah, I'm glad we got one we both end up with. And that kind of rounds out our individual picks. So we've got a graphic on the screen, my Mount Rushmore of X-Men films. So I've got, yes, controversially, X-Men 3, The Last Stand, X-Men First Class, Logan, and X-Men Days of Future Past. That's my Mount Rushmore of the X-Men films. And we'll have a look at Aaron's as well if you want to go through yours once more.
I've got the original X-Men. I've got X-Men Origins Wolverine. I've got Deadpool, and I've got Days of Future Past.
Lovely. I mean, I thought we might have 2 or 3 the same, so I'm kind of glad it's one, because of a series of 14, you are going to get some carryovers that copy, and I'm glad we're both cemented on Days of Future Past and kind of sticking with this. What's going to come next part of the video, and this is where it's not a competition, it's not an argument. Maybe on other videos this could be a debate, depending on what the subject matters are and how passionate people are, but we're going to talk about what we think subjectively the Mount Rushmore of X-Men films is. So I've spoken a lot about, my personal influence of some of these, why I picked them, but why I think they're great for X-Men. If we try and narrow down a 4 together, is the order important on the Mount Rushmore? I don't think so. As long as there's 4 on there, I think that's what matters. Some American, some are screaming. But let's, for discussion purpose, let's try and go through, and maybe in other videos, this is where we could do any feedback from people, and also people at home. Comment your Mount Rushmore of X-Men films. We've done our own ones. I want to hear what you're picking, why, and then maybe chime in with the subjective one. But if I'm going to jump in, not rudely, Days of Future Past was on both of our lists, right? So that's probably going to be on there. That has to be on there, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, that makes total sense, because it just...
Okay.
Yeah.
25% there. Right. Now this is my thinking, and please, you're a guest, so don't be polite. In my head, you kind of want one of the, not the OG3, but you want one of the present day ones, right?
Yeah.
You probably want one of the, not prequel ones, a film set in the past. Sorry, I can hear neighbours' dogs screaming. They're fuming. I was talking about X-Men 3 again. We've also, and you probably want a standalone one. So in my head, and go with me, you have to have one of Deadpool or Logan.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. At least that's a narrow down for later.
Yeah.
We've got Days of Future Past.
Yeah.
Now, here's my question to you, because I'm in completely neutral to this.
Okay.
Would you go with X-Men 1? As you said, right? It started it, not just for the X-Men films, but for really kickstarting the high budget side of the genre. I don't think Blade had the budgets it did for Marvel. I know they were trying to make Spider-Man, they were trying to do Fantastic Four, but X-Men ultimately came first. It brought in an ensemble cast of screen legends like Patrick Stewart, like Ian McKellen, and that goes a long way. And I think the cast members that would later go on to be in comic book films.
Yeah.
But, or do you go for X-Men 2, which many people say it's the best one, it's this one. I know we haven't spoke about it, Dimmick, so I'm going to politely pass that over to you. What do you think, at this X-Men mountain, what sits at the top? Is it X-Men 1 or 2? And for Photoshops, I'll put it as the first one, because I way it's going to be the youngest one. Or both of them, maybe.
I do like the idea of having the Mount Rushmore be like the best ensemble one, the best of the present, the best of the prequel ones, and then a standalone. I like it having that variety, because it kind of shows the variety that the franchise has had over the years. But in terms of choosing between these two, my God, I don't know. It's a weird one. It's like, do you go with the original because of the significance it had, or do you go with the second one because of the quality of it? Because it is common. I always see this on like best comic book films of all time lists, is that X-Men 2 always manages to find its way in there somewhere. Even on like top 10s, top 50s, top 100s, it always finds its way in there, which I think is quite a testament, considering that film is now 20 years old this year.
Yeah.
And I think that's really impressive. Like, again, we kind of get that with Spider-Man 2 as well, which again is 20 this year. So the fact that film and that both of those films are kind of stood the test of time and are still talked about in that conversation of the best films of all time, I think is quite impressive. But then you do look at the original and the significance it had, not just for comic book films, but for like just that style of film as a whole. So it is a tricky one, but I feel like considering what I've just said, I'm gonna veer, which is weird considering it wasn't on even either of our lists. I'm gonna probably veer towards X-Men 2 because of the status it has. I do appreciate
Okay.
everything that X-Men 1 did, and again, it was on my list for a reason as well. But X-Men 2, it will probably have to go to that purely because the fact that it's kind of stood the test of time a little bit um, is still really impressive. Like Logan, to an extent, Logan and Days of Future Past are still. I know Days of Future Past is 10 this year, but like they're still recent. If that makes, I know,
Sorry,
I
sorry.
know.
That's
It just,
that's how young I was doing exams.
uh, yeah, it only really dawned on me as I was mentioning it. I was like, oh, hang on a minute, it's 2014. It came out 10 years ago. But yeah, the fact that like one of the earliest X-Men films and one of the earliest examples of a big budget comic book film being X-Men 2 is still widely regarded as one of the best. It's still really it's kind of like how people view the Christopher Reeve Superman films and the Tim Burton Batman films. Like they were one of the first to do it, and people still talk about them in the context of like greatest comic book films of all time. So I'm it pains me to leave the first one out, but I'm going to pick the second one for that reason.
Okay, no, I'm with you. It's like there's no wrong answer for either of
Yeah.
those. They both could have maybe made it, but I think the chronological spoke about might work a bit better. It's that balance, right? Because Days of Future Past amalgamates the past and present,
Mm.
and that's like the maybe maybe not the peak in terms of quality. Maybe it is the peak of quality, but
Mm.
that is a high point. At that third film, that third entry, and yeah,
Yeah.
let's go. Okay, let's go. X-Men 2 number one.
Mm-hmm.
We know Days of Future Past. I've got in my head as number 3
Yeah.
for the Photoshop. What are your thoughts on First Class being on there?
I'm more than happy to put First Class on there.
Just, I know it's a bit of a cop out because we get Days of Future Past right and it's back to
Yeah, yeah,
back,
yeah.
but it builds that cast and it
Yeah.
cements. I know what you spoke about Wolverine, right? That it showed you
Mm.
could do a spin off,
Mm.
and I agree with that. And I think what First Class did, it showed it wasn't just a spin off of your most popular character.
Mm.
It's a whole new cast
Yeah.
that I say stuck around. Maybe not all of them in between films. Thanks, Peter Dinklage. But there was enough there to them to go right. Here's a new X-Men team.
Yeah.
Let's use them again. And
Yeah.
I know we've not spoke about Apocalypse or Dark Phoenix, but 4 or 5 cast members from First Class went all the way through to the end, and it did
Yeah.
become their own series. And as they so gleefully reminded us,
Mm.
the third film's always the worst in the trilogy. Thanks, pointless knockoff dig at Return of the Jedi, for being what I think is one of the worst X-Men films ever made.
Mm.
It's not even the best third X-Men film in a trilogy.
Mm.
But yeah, okay, so we've got X-Men 2, X-Men First Class, X-Men Days of Future Past. This is the tricky one.
Okay.
Logan, and Deadpool. Oh my god, it's literally the film coming out tomorrow when this video goes up. It's Deadpool versus Wolverine. The winner can have it. I'm joking. Right. This is me
Mm.
thinking out loud.
Yeah.
Logan's the better film, but as you said, right, there's no Logan without Deadpool. I
Yeah.
remember that San Diego announcement. Because of Deadpool, we're going to do Logan. There's going to be another X-Men film, another Wolverine film. The
Mm.
Wolverine film is going to be rated R because
Mm.
of Deadpool. So,
Yeah.
whilst I think Logan is the best
Mm.
of the X-Men,
Yeah.
I see why Deadpool goes on the subjective list for the Mountain. I don't
Yeah.
know what your thoughts are on that, if you agree or disagree. Because at
I.
this point, we're going to me influence versus quality, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think as much as I dislike it, Deadpool's influence is unparalleled. We're not getting Hugh
Mm.
Jackman's Wolverine coming out this week without Deadpool.
Yeah.
Deadpool is the bridge between
Yeah.
MCU to other dimensions to make things a bit
Yeah.
funnier, a bit different, to then go into
Mm.
it properly down the line. So in my head, Deadpool goes in the 4th spot.
Yeah, I was looking at the list of X-Men films, and I was thinking like, Because at the same time, like I agree with you, Logan is one of, if not the best X-Men film, especially from like a quality standpoint. And for that reason, I was going to veer towards Logan, but at the same time, I was thinking back to my Mount Rushmore and the reasons I gave for Deadpool, because again, it's not just Deadpool wasn't just influential for this series; it was influential for like comic book films in general. Like if we hadn't have got that, then we probably wouldn't have got Joker. I'm trying to think of other examples, but I can't really think of any others.
We've had a lot more R-rated films the last few years, and I'll
Yeah.
kind of say this too, right? Even with like Logan, I mean,
Mm.
okay, there's no X-Men film in the title, fine, but
Yeah.
it not only is it not existed without Deadpool, but
Mm.
if there wasn't a Wolverine film coming out tomorrow,
Yeah.
I think Logan would be on that. But I'm
Mm.
not saying it's undermining. I know they're going to make a joke. I know they're going to talk about it. I know there's
Yeah.
probably going to be scenes with him. Surely Ryan Reynolds is going to joke that he was in that world with the multiversey thing. I don't know, but
Mm.
I, in my head, and this is maybe moving into a conversation about the film coming out this week. There's that part of me that doesn't like the fact Hugh Jackman's come back. I love the fact Hugh
Mm.
Jackman's come back, but there is part of me that isn't. And
Yeah.
in my perspective, the fact he's coming back is because of Deadpool, which then to me elevates that Deadpool being on the
Mm.
mountain, right? He
Yeah.
can't come back without Deadpool.
Yeah.
You didn't get Logan because of Deadpool.
Mm.
Well, there's shout out to the Wolverine for having Hiroki Sanada and being great in it.
Mm. Oh yeah, definitely. I also feel like with Deadpool, it just kind of also sums up what it was kind of like a fan favorite character that kind of hadn't had the
The
service it
flowers.
deserved. Yeah, like not just because of what X-Men Origins did to the character, but I also feel like over the years it's become a fan favorite character in the comics, and it had already kind of had decent adaptations of that character in video games, in cartoons, in other forms of media, and film was kind of the last one left. So this also, as well as the influence it had, not just on comic book films, but the franchise, I also feel like it's quite significant in finally, even though this franchise is full of great moments, it feels like it gave the fans what they deserved. And again, similar to what you said about Ryan Reynolds kind of doing so much for this character over the years, it kind of just proves that as well. And I feel like that's another reason why it kind of deserves to be on the Mount Rushmore over Logan, despite Logan being objectively the better film.
No, that's fair, and I agree. It's very well said of that, and it kind of makes this video nice. You know, people having a discussion about films that go on lists that aren't shouting and stabbing each other and bashing down others because they want their picks on. The old days of YouTube, and basically anyone that's watched the channel, I was trying to explain to Aaron what Battle of the Brackets once was, when we just shout and tear each other apart, which was a lot of fun back then, but we can't really do them anymore because they're just so long. But no, that's a weird plug of an old series, but that kind of rounds out this month. So we've got X-Men 2, X-Men First Class, X-Men Days of Future Past, and Deadpool, which I think makes for a pretty fair Mount Rushmore of X-Men films, and that kind of heads over to you guys watching at home. Are we right with the subjective lists? Do you think we're wrong? Do you think maybe we should have put Logan in? Maybe we should have put X-Men 1 in? Maybe we should have put New Mutants in instead.
No,
but
no, we shouldn't.
Yeah, it's one of those where I feel like most people doing this subjectively would have had similar picks, right? It narrows down to a core few, and that's not saying anything more about other films' quality. It's the significance and importance of what these are. And kind of heading into this video with our own Mount Rushmores, it's a series which is letting us get a bit more personal about films and their impact on us, whilst coming together and looking at genres and series and franchises and maybe characters and actors at some points. There's a lot of potential with a series such as this, so kind of slowly plugging out into what else is happening. I do want to hear from people very politely. Maybe think this video is atrocious, then tell me it's atrocious. Don't do it again. Delete the channel. Get rid your 3K subs to the bin. Thank you for 3,000 subs, by the way. I'm sure by the time this video uploads, we'll have gone back to 2,999. They seem to have hovered at for a while or so. That's what I could say. Aaron,
Hmm.
you've been of great help doing this. And as always, I want you to plug your social media. You've got your YouTube
Mhm.
channel. You've just done a video on long legs as well.
Yep.
Talk to the people because I've not seen that yet. That's why it's not on the channel. But let them know what you're up to.
So yeah, I've got, like I said, like George said, I've recently done a video on long legs. Doing a review on that. I do think it's a little bit overhyped, but it is still very good. I want to stress that it's still a very, very, very good movie, but it's getting a little bit overhyped. I should be having a review of Deadpool and Wolverine out later this week, as I'm attending the press screening for it, which I think you are as well. And yeah, apart from that, just I've got stuff constantly on the go. My for the love of film podcast is still going strong. Yeah, I'm just kind of seeing what, because there's a lot of stuff out at the moment, like Twisters, Inside Out, Long Legs. There's a lot of stuff to try and catch up on. So God knows what's going to come in the next few weeks. It could be literally about anything.
No, listen, people, please check out the channel, subscribe. I've been lucky to be a guest on there as well. And that was a good chat on the love of film. And there's been a lot of episodes since. A lot of people that you may have seen this channel before, and you might see them coming up because we're going to be at the the Deadpool and Wolverine press screening too. I'm sure there'll be some photos on social medias if people want to see anything from that screening. If not, if you don't care, that's fine. But there will be a review on the channel. Now, the key, will there be 2 reviews? Yes, we'll do a spoiler-free one probably within the night, and then we'll do a spoiler one maybe at the end of the opening weekend. And then what else to expect? We will have a top 10 X-Men film ranking video. There's a lot of people we've spoke about popping up in that. We are working on it. We're going to, I said at the start of the video, give the people a bit of time after Deadpool and Wolverine, and it will be our traditional top 10 style where we have different people submitting their top 10 rankings. And my 4 is going to be different to the 4 I've given on my Mount Rushmore, but it'll pop up at some point, just the order in which is going to be different. So that's everything I can talk about. Once again, thank you all for watching. Aaron, for taking time and day to help us out. It's great to talk about X-Men. I know you said you didn't get the chance either, but it feels somewhat niche for a series so big. I guess if YouTube was 10 years out, it would have been one of them a lot of people spoke about. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you all for watching, and join us on the next one. Take care.